Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Oh my goodness, I'm like 3 or 4 weeks into my reverse diet now, which is kind of exciting. It's also kind of scary to think how quickly time just flies. I'm sure you guys can relate to that. It's gonna be the end of the year before we know it. But wow, we have had a very vibrant past 7 to 10 days. We just got back and work was like, whoa! And then we had a little trip out to Austin, Texas, which was a whole lot of fun. We got to do a podcast with Nick Bears. Some of you may be familiar with the supplement line BPN. That was a really great opportunity. He's fairly well known in the fitness industry, so what an amazing experience that was to go and check out the facility and really just put into perspective like how giant some of these supplement companies are. It was like, I think an 80,000 square foot facility with their studio, their gym, marketing area. It was just so awesome. So it definitely got me really excited and motivated thinking about the future, which is what I do a lot of. So we also got to spend a little bit of time with Peter Tia and his family, massive name in the, probably more on the medical side of the industry, and is kind of dabbling in, and probably largely due to the clientele that he works with in the fitness industry. So wow, that was such an awesome opportunity, and again, so insightful, and also like what an awesome family. Spending a little bit of time with them one-on-one, it's so uncommon in my opinion these days to meet people that are at that level that are also so genuine and like friendly and welcoming. So thank you to those guys for having us out over the weekend. So I will be bringing you those podcasts very soon. I'm sure we'll probably have to wait a few weeks before we can get our hands on them, but definitely we'll be bringing those to you because they are going to be super insightful podcasts. Kind of got back and I've been trying to work in a little bit of training, trying to do a little bit of work and stuff, and it's been extremely busy since we've gotten back, but I have been doing okay with my reverse. Now, I think one of the things that I'm gonna like give myself a big pat on the back in regards to has been the habits that I have built through fat loss and continuing to implement those habits into this reverse diet. And I think one of the things that I have not done as well as I could in the past is prioritize the whole reverse process. And what does that mean? Because it could be anything. It really means being consistent with my nutrition practices and being consistent with my training. What I tend to do is goal hop. So it's like one goal, move on to the next project, move on to the next project. And when it comes to a fat loss phase, like it really doesn't stop at the end. Like you've got to keep focusing and kind of work yourself back out of that if you'd like to be able to get your calorie intake back up to a place that's really manageable and sustainable without adding an unnecessary amount of body fat. So while we were away, I was able to get 3 workouts in, and they were not the best sessions that I've ever had, but I think I kind of got in there. I was pretty focused, which is kind of unusual for me, I think, and maybe you guys can relate to this. When you've finished like the really hard and difficult part of fat loss, and I'll extend that to some competitors, once all of the whirlwind of the show and kind of everything that goes into that kind of settles, it's almost like you kind of fall into this, bit of a lull. And if we look at some of the cohort studies of competitors and looking at their mental health and some of the shifts in mood, clinical depression is something that can actually come up, after, you have this massive big high. So I wouldn't say it's been as bad for me this year, and part of that's because we've had so many awesome things kind of in the pipeline to continue working to. But if you've just set your focus so clearly on this one thing and you haven't kind of diversified your interests, or you've got something else that kind of fills up your cup at the end of the day that you're really passionate about, it can definitely feel like, you fall in a big heap. And you don't really know where to go from there. So the fact that we've had all this stuff going on has been great, and I have continued to execute some of those habits. So I think one of the things that I've done poorly in the past, number one is just stop tracking. So I'll allow new things to come at me, and again, you guys can apply this to your own circumstances. It might be, I allow myself to take on, projects like, helping out with, school help with the kids, or, I've been asked to do this other, side project. I mean, it's really interesting, but it requires a lot of my time, and I've just kind of let that habit go. So this year, post-show, I've definitely done a much better job at like putting foods in. Have I weighed everything? know, and part of that has been because we've been so busy and on the road. So I've gotten to the point now where I don't take a scale. I do not take a food scale anywhere with me, even when I'm about to get on stage. And the only reason that I do that is because of the experience that I have had doing it in the past. So for people that I work with that are brand new to the fitness industry and that haven't got that experience, or for me as a dietitian, that's almost built into the curriculum. Like, you have to be able to identify and approximate food weights, and if you mess it up, you don't pass. But if you are somebody that's new, I would really encourage you to get into that kind of practice in the home environment as often as you can, because it does help and has some carryover then when you go out to a restaurant to be better able to kind of make those estimates and feel confident in those decisions. That's kind of the only thing that I haven't tracked on a scale, and also just continuing to take my body weight. Now, I know anybody that has done a reverse diet and that has had any struggles with putting on body fat, and I'm gonna guess that's probably about 95% of people. No one wants to put on unnecessary body fat. So it's a real concern. And if you have been somebody that has really learned to gauge your value and perception based on the scale, the reverse part is so challenging. It can be really daunting because you've got to get on, and we're kind of anticipating, some increases in weight. And certainly in that initial few weeks, and certainly for me, I was in a very depleted state, specifically depleted from carbohydrate or my glycogen stores. So we go from show week, where I was basically squeezing out the last little bit of body fat that I thought I needed to. So I had only 2 days or 3 days where my calories actually came up. My glycogen storage period is really, really low. So that initial jump back up in calories, there's gonna be a fairly substantial shift in weight, but that's not necessarily body fat increases. It's just the increases in glycogen being stored and increases in body water, and also sometimes just food volume. If you're eating more calories, the overall quantity of food that you're consuming on a day-to-day basis is going to be greater. I was expecting that in that first week, and I went from 60 kilograms, I don't know what that is in pounds, it's probably 132, 133, something like that, straight up to 64 kilograms after the first, I think it was 7 to 10 days. That was really hard for me to take, because I know that I started only at 65. But that initial big kind of whoosh effect, your body starts to slow down in the way that it processes and metabolizes the macronutrients coming in. You become less efficient at gluconeogenesis and all these other processes. That was really scary for me, but I have definitely seen it kind of taper back down. And as I've returned to training, it's definitely kind of plateaued out. So right now I weighed in yesterday and my weight is sitting at about 63.9 kilograms. So that's a kind of big hike in a few days, but that's okay. And I've got to keep reminding myself that's okay. It's okay. It doesn't matter. Your body isn't the most important thing, and the weight on the scale isn't that important in the grand scheme of things. And I think just kind of tempering my expectations has really allowed me to manage that just fine. I feel really good. And because I'm not stressed about it, I'm not completely fixated and really focused, it's enabled me to kind of get on with other tasks, and those tasks are very fulfilling and rewarding. I haven't been really distracted with, the tiny little bit of body fat that I can see on my body, and it's enabled me to keep very grounded across all of this. So I've only had one little moment, and I'm not even going to call it a slip up or a mistake, because I was completely present at the time, and there's something that I want to talk about with you guys today. It was a serving of Quaker oats. So I hadn't had oats or been having them just because of the carbohydrate content. Obviously my primary carbohydrates had been coming from veggies for the most part, kind of leading into the final weeks of the show. So I was like, you know what, I need some food that is satisfying. And kind of doing it on the skinny just wasn't good enough. Now, in theory, the foods that I have been consuming are very satiating, but I'm only looking at that from one perspective, which is the physiological feeling of, satiation and feeling full. I shifted to something that I thought would satisfy up here. And again, that is the other component of feeling satiated. It's the psychological satisfaction of food. Like, how much pleasure does eating this food give you? Does it taste good? Because something can fill you up and you can feel really satisfied. But if that was like, you know, a kilogram of broccoli, am I really gonna feel satisfied up here? I sprinkled some white chocolate chips and Reese's chips in this. And I had like some caramel sauce, and we have, is it like that? I think it's called Heath. Again, I'm so ignorant to the candy in America, but it was like little toffee bits. Already, like, it's hiking up in calories because I've got like 50 grams of chocolate chip bits and white chocolate bits in this bowl of cereal. And I just caught myself doing these ones. With the little hole in the bag, and I'm like, oh, gee, that tastes really good. So I like sat it down. I'm like, yeah, I'm at this point I was already not, you know, super starving or famished. And then I was like, I found myself doing that with the Reese's packet. And, you know, before I knew it, I've probably had another, I'm going to be real with y'all, probably 100 grams. Just between a few, picking at it, you know, nibbling at it, munching through the course of the day. That one moment for me could have been complete turmoil. And if I look back, you know, several years ago, I probably would have had a major stress response to that. And that would have continued because my coping system was food. So I really caught myself in that moment, and I guess one of the things was, you know, it's okay. The first thing, I say it out loud. I started by saying things like in my mind, and then I've kind of progressed over the years to just verbalizing it out loud. I don't know whether there's a difference. I do think that there is some research on people that communicate things vocally versus just having a thought in their mind, but that's really helped me. So I was like, haha, oh my God, of course, you know, you knew this was going to happen. It's normal to feel, you know, a little bit restricted lately because you've had to let go of a lot of your favorite foods, and certainly not in quantities that feels like satiating. So just talking myself through like, that's okay, this is normal, you know, how tasty was that? You know, how enjoyable was that to have something so good? And then I also applied that to the rest of my day. It was like, oh, I'm gonna feel so much better towards, you know, the evening tonight, and I'm probably gonna have a better training session, and maybe it'll even help me sleep better because I'm going to bed, you know, feeling really satisfied. So just kind of giving myself a few little positive cues just allowed me to kind of move on from that instead of, you know, ruminate and like spiral down into this really negative place, which I know a lot of people do. So there was no guilt or anything of that sort. But that leads me to the next point that I wanted to talk about. So you heard me discuss physiological satisfaction and satiety, and then we've also got psychological satisfaction and satiety through, you know, the enjoyment of food, through the taste of food, and maybe even like visually, you know, does something look nice on the plate? Does that help enhance your experience with eating that food? What I have found with a lot of clients that I'm working with, and also some of our carbon diet coach users, is they will tell me that they're feeling physically full to the point of potentially, you know, being really uncomfortable, and they're unable to stop eating. And I understand that. I can resonate. I have been in that situation. One of the things to ask yourself if you have struggled with overeating is, let's take a look at the types of foods that you're consuming, not only in that meal, so what is it that you are overeating on? And let's also have a look at what you've been eating throughout the course of the day. And there are several reasons why people tend to overeat. It might not necessarily be a true binge eating episode where you completely feel out of control, your mind almost leaves your body while it autopilots and feeds. So there is, again, it works along the spectrum. But one of the things that is really prominent in some of the clients I'm now starting to work with are not having enough food variety or diversity, you know, within each meal, and then also across the course of the day. And maybe we can take that one step further and look at what their food intake looks like over a 7-day period. Typically, if somebody is restricting a certain type of food, for example, they may be avoiding highly refined sugars or anything that contains carbohydrates, or maybe they are avoiding foods that they know are overly processed, but do have, you know, a high fat content, and maybe they are also very energy dense. If people are avoiding those macronutrients and they're just kind of isolating one macronutrient on its own. I had a client who reported back to me, she got this new recipe and it was like how to do Brussels, and I think she knew that I'm a Brussels fan, like truly through and through. So she said, I'd made this, beautiful dish. I'd used a whole packet of Brussels sprouts. And then, she'd done the bacon. She'd, kind of used a recipe that I had suggested to her. And she was like, it was so good. But I couldn't stop eating them. Like, it was Brussels. Like, who overeats? She ate the whole packet, which I've, been there, maybe not on Brussels, but other foods. And she was so disappointed in herself. And I kind of had to remind her or say to her, first and foremost, like, I just need to put this in context. Was that the only food that you had kind of prepared? And she'd said to me, well, I'd thought about having something else with it, and it was getting late, and that was just what I had. And by the time I'd cooked that, I was exhausted. So, in those scenarios where we've got one particular food isolated without other constituents to really make it a meal, that can be when we see people overeating. So I encourage you to look at your diet, and if you're just kind of eating, I'm going to pick on Lane right now, if you're just eating like cheese, or he just looks over at me right now. Love you. Or
what's wrong with cheese?
There's nothing.
Nothing's wrong with cheese.
There's nothing wrong with cheese, I know. Not that Lane overeats cheese, he's just not like that. I always joke and say he's robotic, he'll hit his macros perfectly every day. It's fine, but that doesn't give him any psychological stress. So I really want to emphasize here, if you are having some difficulties overeating on a particular food and it is giving you some psychological distress, it's causing you to be anxious, to feel guilty, to have just a lot of rumination and discomfort around that, please take a look at how you're constructing your meals, because it may be that you're just lacking food diversity. The other thing to consider is if you are only eating foods based on taste, for instance, which a lot of us do. It's like, I like this food, like I'm gonna eat it, it tastes good. Sure, that's a very reasonable decision to eat certain foods. And it might give you a lot of satisfaction up here. But then the converse problem that we might have is that somebody feels like they're constantly hungry, even though they're choosing foods that they really enjoy the taste of and they get a lot of pleasure and satiety from eating that, but then they overeat anyway. And that might be because you're not getting enough diversity of those filling, fibrous foods. So it's so important to kind of look at how your meals are created, and then also, how you're distributing your...
Cheese! Talk shit, get hit. Don't trash my cheese!
Where's all this cheese coming from?
Cheese! Powered by cheese.
Specifically Cabot cheese.
Cabot cheese.
So the other thing to consider is also meal distribution, so how that actually looks for you over the course of the day. And a lot of people end up getting to the point where they've fasted for several hours. It may be intentional, it may be completely unintentional. Neither is wrong or right, but that long period without any food ends up leading somebody to get to a point where they're absolutely ravenous, and now it doesn't matter what the food is, they're going to overconsume because the body's natural self-defense mechanism, and we're trying to preserve your life at this point, the body is going to release those hormones that are encouraging you to eat. And it will continue to encourage you to eat until it feels like it's got enough fuel to function. And often when we let ourselves go for long periods, that response is heightened and more than it would be if we'd had regular meal spacing throughout the day. And in fact, one thing that I can say, and there was a study that I was looking at yesterday, in situations where people are given two different types of diet, one being intermittent fasting and one being low in carbohydrate, what we tend to see is that people who do restrict food, so they do some form of intermittent fasting, that are also trying to limit the amount of carbohydrate foods, there does tend to be a greater frequency or prevalence of eating disorders and a host of other negative psychological outcomes. Again, I'm always looking at, how does this impact, individuals? Because some people are massive advocates of like carbs, and I'm one of them. So for me to do that, that would be really challenging, but there are also other people that habitually do not consume a whole lot of carbohydrates, and that actually works just fine for them. They're able to sustain that and they don't feel this strong need to have a whole lot of diversity. So I'm saying this in the context of averages. Take this for what it is. You may be one of those people that do not seem to be negatively influenced psychologically by restricting, carbohydrate foods for long periods of time or by intermittent fasting. So to wrap that all up, please take a look at the amount of variety that's in your diet. If you are always restricting yourself from foods that you know you really enjoy, for me, if I had to restrict cookies, ice cream, sweets and desserts in general, if I had to restrict yogurt and just a whole host of other foods that don't necessarily do very well, like in the keto world, I would binge eat all the time. The main reasons for my difficulties were really the underlying why. And that was partly to do with body image, the need to stay lean. Again, that's very much ingrained through diet culture. We're kind of wired to, stay lean and slim as females. So I was constantly restricting calories. I was chronically, dieting and trying my best to undereat. And it's not a good place to be. And naturally, it was like this vicious cycle of overeat, restrict, overeat, restrict. So we can break down some of those walls that you may have, be it existing beliefs about certain foods, particularly those that are perhaps more energy dense, maybe more processed, or that contain kind of like buzzwords. So like gluten is one of them, plant oils is another like buzzword, or natural, those types of restrictions that are often unnecessary can really make things a whole lot harder than they need to be once you start to educate yourself about how a calorie deficit works, the diversity of ways that you can create a calorie deficit, and that generally speaking, we don't always need to be restricting in order to have, a healthy body and also mind. I guess to wrap all this up, reverse dieting for me is going much, much better. I feel extremely confident. I'm very motivated. I've actually got to find some time this weekend to put together some new programs so that next week I have something completely new to start working on, and hopefully I can bring that program to you guys here very soon. But right now, my calories actually stayed pretty much the same last week. I didn't get any adjustments, so I'm right around that 1490 mark this week, which probably sounds crazy low to you, but guys, you've got to remember that the amount of exercise that I was doing to get into the deficit for that show was quite high, far more than I can realistically maintain to be able to continue with my day-to-day life. So I've opted to drop a lot of that. So I'm not doing like 3 30-minute Peloton rides anymore, and I'm not doing 12,000 steps every day. I'm down to 1 20-minute Peloton ride, and I'm just trying to nudge 10,000 steps. So for me, that was kind of the big weight and the commitment off, and that kind of acts as that initial step in the reverse diet. And I probably approximate the amount of energy that I would have expended through all of those changes, somewhere around 1,700 or so calories. So if I divide that over 7 days of the week, that's essentially adding, 248, 250 calories instantly to where I was at post-show. So I was down at like 1190, 1200. I'm already back up, into this 1400 range just with that decrease in energy expenditure. So it probably will take me a little bit of time to kind of get my calories back up, because I'm just not able to make the same kind of sacrifices with my time. But we'll have to see. I'll keep letting you know how it's all going. If there are things that I struggle with over the coming weeks, I'll definitely share them with you, because I know that you all are going through similar things in your reverse, and I'd like to tell you how I kind of manage them as I go through as well. So guys, if you are interested in getting some help with reverse dieting, you're not sure where to start, you've never done it before, and you just don't feel confident, maybe using our books or things to do it on your own, go and check out our nutrition coaching app, Carbon Diet Coach. It has a reverse diet setting amongst other settings as well, and we give you options to either have a calorie boost at the beginning if you absolutely feel exhausted, you're starving, you're just not in a good place. Take that initial calorie boost and just see where that gets you, and then continue on from there. We also have a 20% calorie boost option, and that would be more appropriate for people that have gotten to an extremely low point with their calories. Perhaps you've gotten to your calorie floor. Perhaps you've gotten extremely lean, or perhaps you're experiencing some severe binge eating or overeating type behaviors. Let's get you to a point where you're only just over your maintenance. You may see a small shift in your body weight, but wouldn't you rather have an amount of calories that you know that you can adhere to which psychologically, that's gonna give you a win. If you keep trying to hit numbers and you're unsuccessful over and over and over, that in itself is fatiguing. So if you're struggling with that, take some higher calories and just hang out there for a little bit until you kind of find the ropes and until you do a little bit more work on how to manage some of those struggles. So all the links to Carbon Diet Coach are going to be found in the description below. You can go and check out Carbon Diet Coach, their website, which is joincarbon.com, or head over to their Instagram page. We are very active on social media. So I think that's probably all from me today. If you've got any questions for me, please feel free to drop them in the comments and I will see you soon. Bye guys.